All right, welcome back. This is the Coach Mark Gottfried Show. I've had some unbelievable guests, but today I'm really fired up because I have who I think is, a pioneer and probably one of the most successful agents in the history of all sports and a lot of sports. And I have a wonderful, wonderful guest today. So Leigh Steinberg, welcome into the Coach Mark Gottfried Show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you, Leigh. So kind of starting off, and you've had so much notoriety throughout your career. You've represented probably more. I think you have represented more number one draft picks in the NFL, and then boxing and baseball and all kind of sports. But how did Leigh Steinberg get into becoming an agent way back? Probably 40 or 50 years ago, I'm going to guess. It's been a little while, but how did Leigh Steinberg become the agent Leigh Steinberg?
Well, when I started, woolly mammoths and saber-toothed tigers were trans-navigating the earth. So I went in undergrad a year to UCLA, and then everything was happening in Berkeley. It was the counterculture in Vietnam. So I went up there, and I was in law school, and I was a grad counselor in an undergraduate dorm, and they moved the freshman football team into the dorm. And one of the students was the quarterback, Steve Bartkowski. So some time passed. I graduated from law school and was about to take a job, and Bartkowski had been selected number 1 overall in the 1975 NFL draft. And he asked me to represent him. And there I was, brimming with legal experience. And he was the first pick, and there was a World Football League competing, so we had leverage, and he got the largest rookie contract in NFL history.
Was there ever a time, Leigh, like even that one, like Steve Bartkowski comes to you where, I mean, we all kind of, we have courage and we're going to conquer it no matter what. But I got to guess there was a little bit where you're a little bit maybe nervous as well because you're just beginning. You're just starting.
Except I had no larger sense of the reality of what was going on. I thought this would be fun. And so my dad raised me with 2 core values, which is treasure relationships, especially family. And second of all, try to make a meaningful difference in a positive way in the world, help heal other people's pain, help people who can't help themselves. So I was looking for a profession that might fulfill that. And when we get to Atlanta, there are Klieg lights in the sky at the airport, like for a movie premiere. A huge crowd's pressed up against the police line, and the first thing I heard was, "We interrupt the Johnny Carson show to bring you a special news bulletin. Steve Bartkowski and his attorney Leigh Steinberg have just arrived at the Atlanta airport." And I really saw the tremendous idol worship and veneration that athletes were held in communities across the country, how they were the movie stars. And I thought, if I could get them to retrace their roots and go back to the high school community, set up a scholarship fund, work with the Boys and Girls Club or a church, and then at the collegiate level, rebond with those alums and make a contribution back to that community. And then at the professional level, could they find some particularly compelling cause that they would like to make a stand on? And then we set up a charitable foundation with the leading business figures, political figures, and community leaders sitting on the board to execute a program. So years ago, that was Rolf Benerska's Kicks for Critters, where every time he kicked a field goal, people contributed in San Diego. And the first year we did it, he kicked a field goal off the flipper of a sea lion, and the next year off the hoof of a baby elephant, and raised millions for the Fund for Endangered Species. That's work done putting the 200 single parent and their family into the first home they'll ever own by making the down payment. Or it's Patrick Mahomes with his 15 and the Mahomies. So there really wasn't a field of sports agentry it was so embryonic that general manager could just slam the phone down and say, we don't deal with agents. There was no guaranteed right. So those early years, there was no profession to aspire to. We had to sort of make it up as we went along.
When I coached all the years, Leigh, and I had great players, and I've had lottery picks in the NBA that I coached, and I used to tell people that, when we recruit a guy, a player, it's pretty competitive. I mean, it's most fans don't realize the recruiting is as competitive or more competitive than actually the games to actually get a player. We recruit them, and we recruit sometimes in the old days and started in the 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th. You're recruiting and you're building a relationship. But I used to tell people that in the agent world, the competition and that competitiveness is just the same. Like, trying to secure and build a relationship with a young person, and it takes time and credibility and then trust, and because somebody has to trust you that you're going to then represent them the right way. So talk about that a little bit, because I think the competitive part of what you do is as competitive or more competitive than what we do.
So we used to profile a player, look into his background, see whether or not he'd be willing to be a role model, leave a legacy, what his work ethic was, and importantly, in critical circumstances, in adversity. So a quarterback who's thrown a couple interceptions, the crowd is booing, the game's getting out of hand. What does he do then? Can he compartmentalize, adopt a quiet mind, and elevate his level of play in critical situations to take a team to and through victory? So, Mark, I think the most important skill in life is listening. And it's drawing out another human being, peeling back the layers of the onion until you understand someone else's deepest anxieties and fears and their greatest hopes and dreams. If you can put yourself into another person's heart and mind and see the world the way they see it, not your initial supposition about who they are and what they feel, but what they actually value most. Is it short-term economic gain? Is it long-term economic security? Is it spiritual values? Is it family? Is it being a starter? Is it being on a winning team? That constellation of values will fit differently into each person's life. So I need to understand not only the athlete, but their family and extended family, and understand how I can best fulfill them.
What's some of when you took guys like, the Troy Aikmans of the world? I was at UCLA when Troy transferred from Oklahoma, and, he had an amazing career. But, where was it that you've kind of already said it, but where you found your joy in that? Like when you get a player, and sometimes a guy is a number one pick, but sometimes, you've represented a lot of players that weren't the number one pick, and maybe they really blossomed later as their career went on. But for you, like that joy of like, when you go to bed at night and you're helping people, but for you, like where did you find that joy in those relationships or with those players?
It was by having a holistic view as to how I could help them. It was helping them be a role model. It was mentoring them through the draft process. It was bonding with them in that process. I ended up in football with 64 first-round draft picks, and the very first pick in the draft, 8 different years. And it was watching their maturation. It was trying to help stimulate the best, which I inherited from the parents who raised them, stimulate the best values. It was focusing on second career. So the role modeling part of it, watching Warren Moon speak to a convention, and he asked the people who had been the beneficiary of his scholarship to stand up, and one by one this entire room stands up. It's athletes changing lives. It's how we can use sports to make a difference in the world, how we can target an issue like bullying and get pro athletes to talk to college athletes, to talk to high school athletes about tolerance. And if you do that, you can change the culture of a high school real quick because the athletes sit on top of the pyramid. So it's watching what we're able to do. And for me, it was having a crisis of conscience when it came to head injuries and concussions in football, and going to doctors with the players and asking how many is too many. At one point, I'm representing half the starting quarterbacks in football. They keep getting hit in the head. We go to doctors, no answers. So my father used to say to me, when you're looking for someone to solve a problem or to take action, there's a tendency to wait for the amorphous they or them, older people, political figures. And he would say to me, you could wait forever. The they is you, son. You're the they. So it's holding the concussion conferences that we started in 1994. It's understanding that I didn't go to law school to lead players down the road to dementia. So we just established a new concussion foundation in my name to try and do research, prevention, awareness, cure. But it's seeing a larger role for what you could be as someone representing athletes.
Yeah, powerful. That's powerful, Leigh. When you sat in there and a lot of times on draft night, and like you mentioned, you've had 8 number 1 overall picks. You've represented, in my opinion, probably more great players than anybody else out there. But it's still on draft night. There's always movement. Something's happening. At the last minute, somebody gets some information, and then all of a sudden they're a little nervous about this player. And I've sat in the green room in the NBA draft and had my players, and I've sat there with their families, and it's anxious, even me, and I'm just, I'm there to support, but I'm nervous and anxious. And then, the phone rings, and, there's a lot of jockeying around like that. How did you, I know the players that you represented, they're excited, but they got to be pretty nervous too. And, you're there kind of as a veteran. You've been through the wars, you've seen all this, and you're able to kind of calm everybody. But I'm sure for those players, that's a moment of, it's tough. It's joyful if they're selected high or if they're picked. But talk about that a little bit and kind of that prep for that day, that draft day.
Well, hopefully I've been in touch with enough teams so I actually know who's most apt to take a player. Mm-hmm. And as long as I don't cross-fertilize that information, teams will be honest. So they'll tell you, if he's available, my pick will come. So hopefully I've got enough information from relationships with owners and general managers and coaches that I can accurately prognosticate where a player is going to be picked, or at least 2 or 3 places. So hopefully that, and their families. So I'll do an overall information concept. Draft time is not real time. And whether it was basketball with Greg Anthony or Wayne Simeon or baseball where we had the picks, but in football, usually you're at someone's home and they have their extended family with them. So this is the fruition of every day that's happened since Pop Warner football or Little League, all that discipline, all that striving. And the draft time is not real time. It's water torture time. Every second seems like a minute. Every minute seems like an hour. Yeah. Drip, drip, drip. Yeah. And the time between picks seems endless. So that all ratchets up and ratchets up. And even if I totally prepared a player for where he's going, there still is a lot of tension in the air. It's fraught. And then the player gets drafted, and it's ecstasy and joy and complete chaos. And my favorite day of the year, because you're looking at someone's extended family, all of the people that have been part of this, the coaches, the pastor, the high school coach, the friends who've all been supportive, and now it's rolled into one ecstatic moment.
Do you think, Leigh, and just if I was to go back, and I've had agents represent me when I was coaching, if you were to kind of be somebody said, well, why would I pick Leigh Steinberg? Like, what in your mind, if you were trying to sell, and you have 1,000,000 times, and you've walked into somebody's home and said, here's what I can offer, here's what, most of the time you would think they're choosing you because of why?
Philosophy.
Yeah.
The concept of the athlete as role model, the concept of preparing them for second career. In terms of track record, if you can tell someone, we have 90 players and 82 have been to the Pro Bowl. I understand the draft process well enough so that I can make sure a player is prepared. We can show evidence of how players have moved. You talk about Patrick Mahomes, and people assume he was a second or third round draft pick gunslinger. But somehow it's educating and guiding someone to the highest draft position. It's branding and marketing and making sure that their off the field endorsements do well. But it's having someone who knows you. And one time, Kenny Easley, who was a big star back in the 80s,
really good player,
chose me. And I said, why did you do that? He said, well, I was driving along. I had a question about the draft, and I thought I better call Leigh. And so it's having a plan. Yeah. So we'll lay out a day by day from the time you sign until draft day. Here's what you'll be doing every single day. Here's your training. Here's how we're going to prepare you for a combine. Here's how we're going to do the rest. But at the end of the day, it's trust. It's a feeling like you can put someone's life in your hands and treasure them. So my goal in life was never money. It was always impact. And so hopefully someone gets a sense of that.
Has there ever been a time, Leigh, where you've had somebody like in your gut, this player is going to be really good, but the GMs around the league, especially maybe in football, where you're like, I know it, and you have a great relationship with the GMs, but you're not selling it, but in your gut, like, hey, this guy's got some things that maybe everyone else isn't seeing right now. And you're trying to sell it to the GMs. And maybe they weren't biting at the time. Maybe they were saying, I don't know, Leigh. I mean, maybe that's happened a lot. I don't know. Is there anybody that would stand out like that for you that you knew in your gut, like, hey, this guy's got a chance to be great?
Ben Roethlisberger was an example of that with the Pittsburgh Steelers, and didn't have the profile of Phillip Rivers or Eli Manning, but he pretty much knew. And I know by talking to a lot of people, and I'm not going to tell you I'm the greatest scout in terms of X's and O's, but I can see that quality of resilience, of the ability to come back in negative circumstances. Mahomes would have been an example of that. Everybody thought he was a gunslinger, but the reality was the Texas Tech team was giving up 50 points a game, and he felt under pressure every drive to throw a touchdown pass. So the draft is a projection of how a player is going to be for the next 10 to 12 years. So you have to project him past that and see what a player like that would be like in a 3, 5, 7 step drop in a more disciplined offense. and be able to project that. The other thing about it is I don't tell people things that it's just puffing. In other words, they have the ability to scout and the rest of it. What I can tell them about is the personal qualities.
Patrick Mahomes, who I think is going to go down as one of the greatest quarterbacks. I mean, there have been great quarterbacks, obviously, but to me, he's up in that category, like, already. And he struggled, for a lot of reasons. They didn't really protect him very well in this Super Bowl, but he has the everybody used to say, well, he has that it factor. Nobody really ever knew what that meant, but he just has, like you mentioned, there's a resiliency. There's something about him that he is not afraid either to make a play. Like, he's got courage to do things with the ball and, throw shovel passes and underhand and behind the back. And, if he's really in his groove, and the Super Bowl wasn't an indication of that, but did you see some of that prior to the draft and prior to him entering the NFL, where he just kind of has that? There's something about great players, and I used to always say they have the courage. They're not afraid to make a mistake. They're going to go for it when they need to, and they just find a way to make these miraculous plays. I've had players in basketball I've coached that way, and you can't always put your thumb on it. You always don't know exactly what it is, but did you see that in him, in Patrick?
So, looking at his background, he's raised by a relief pitcher, his father. And so he grows up around Derek Jeter, and he grows up around A-Rod, and he's there, and he sees his father, and he sees how not to get too high or too low, how to stay in the moment, what the relationship is between preparation and performance. And he's grounded. So if he was sitting here, he'd ask you how you were doing. So he's grounded and calm and in crisis. And that's when we talk about compartmentalizing what you're looking for. And because he played baseball, he can throw the ball at unusual angles. And he's got eyesight that's gives him a sense of what's going on around him that really is elevated.
I've had people tell me in basketball too, Patrick Mahomes, I've had a lot of people tell me he was actually a really good high school basketball player. Probably could have played in college as a basketball guy, and baseball and football. So, he had that ability just to play, and adapt and pick up a ball and probably be good at about anything he does.
Most athletes that I've worked with do have tremendous all-around athletic skills.
Yeah. How about this one, Leigh? How about maintaining the relationships with all of the GMs around the league in the NFL? Because if I'm a GM and you call, I want to trust what you're saying. We have a relationship. I don't think you would never have been able to be as good as you were all those years without having really good relationships with those guys, because at some point they would shut you off. If you're lying to them, or you're trying to sell them some guy that's not very good, and then they draft a guy and he's not very good at all, and your credibility is on the line. So that relationship over all those years with those folks, tell me about that.
So again, if you can put yourself in someone else's heart and mind and see the world the way they did. So after a while, I went to owners and I said, look, we're doing this the wrong way. We have these ugly public negotiations for draft picks. All they do is push fans away from sport. We have collective bargaining agreements that feature millionaires against billionaires. Again, fans can't relate to that. What we ought to be about is growing the brand. And you, Mr. Owner, and I have an interest in making this pie bigger. So let's stop having public bad negotiations. Let's do that behind the scenes. Let's not have ugly collective bargaining agreement. Let's keep all that business private. Why don't we focus on how I can help you be a more profitable owner? Maybe it's about the stadium and creating naming rights and ancillary revenue streams with luxury boxes and premium seating. Maybe it's about an NFL or an NBA network. Maybe it's about merchandising and memorabilia. Maybe it's about the use of the internet and let's work together on projects like that. And I always knew that for my players to be compensated, you needed the owner to be able to make revenue and sensitive to that. That's first. Second of all, we deal in repetitive business. So the key is that never to stick your foot on someone's exposed neck and never to embarrass them or humiliate them publicly. So when the deal's done, what I have to say is brilliant general manager, brilliant player, and they both got the best side of the deal.
Leigh, you've represented a lot of guys in boxing too, some of the best in that. And boxing to me is, I'm a boxing fan, by the way. I grew up with all the heavyweights and the Sugar Rays and the Tysons and George Foremans, and that was my era. I loved all those guys. But boxing had to be, or was it maybe, I'm guessing, like a completely different kind of turf than football. You're even finding that up-and-coming boxer that's coming up is different, than obviously in football. Talk about just how you kind of got into boxing, and did you enjoy representing the boxers? Because that to me is like a whole different world.
Well, I grew up with Muhammad Ali as one of my heroes, and boxing, people forget, in the 50s and 60s was just as popular as football.
Yeah.
I mean, so Oscar de la Hoya, as people called me, and that's how I got started. And after a while, and then Lennox Lewis, and after a while, I thought that business is not being done correctly. So I said, guys, when you retire, you ought to be your own promoter. What do you need to make a fight? You need a venue, you need certification by the boxing commissions, and you need TV. We don't need to be paying someone 40% of your purse to set up chairs. You can do that yourself. And Lennox set up Lions Productions and Sugar Ray Golden Boy. And so the goal was, how can you make the athletes the owners? In other words, when I did Brian Boitano coming back from the Olympics as an ice skater, there were ice shows, and I tried to figure out how we could have him and Katarina Witt own the tour themselves. So it's a different layer of the player as owner. A couple of the players I have in the NFL are minority owners of NFL teams. So no longer ending a boxing career like Joe Louis, who was a greeter at a Las Vegas casino. Let's set you up in a way where you can use your brand to bring reform to the industry, to stop boxers from getting exploited, to try to give them financial literacy, to try to give them some form of an education. So I tried to take a fresh look at it and see how we could make it better.
Was there a lot of pushback in that, Leigh? I would imagine, like the Don Kings of the world back then in the 70s, 80s, that they probably didn't like that
Not
concept.
real happy.
They weren't
No.
a fan of Leigh Steinberg's idea on that one.
Right. But again, I'm working on a project right now, which is a jockey league, which could resurrect horse racing by having the jockeys have a draft and a series of games and advertising on the silks and everything. So part of the excitement is try to reimagine a better way to take different areas of sports and improve them.
A lot of people, obviously, they watched the movie Jerry Maguire. You've been asked about this 100 times, I'm sure, if not 1,000 times, but kind of that whole thing too, because it was obviously a popular movie, and you had a cameo in there, and you've been in a lot of
Not
movies.
to quit my day job, right?
But the whole concept of that, and it resonated with people, because I think there's a lot of people that really they don't really understand what an agent does. They kind of do, but they really don't. They're kind of, the general fan is just out there, but that movie, that had to be a lot of fun for you as well.
So Cameron Crowe called me up in 1993 and asked if he could follow me around, that's a director-writer, for a film that would feature a sports agent. So we went on a long journey, and he came with me to the league meetings in Palm Desert in 93, came to Pro Scouting Day at USC. He came to Draft Day back in 93, where I had Drew Bledsoe as the first pick. He came up to the Bill Parcells press conference. He came to my Super Bowl parties. He came to games with me. And I told him lots and lots of stories. And he incorporated that into a script. And then my job as technical advisor was to vet the script to make sure the willing suspension of disbelief that holds you in a motion picture wasn't shattered. You knew that the dialogue was realistic. You knew that the look was realistic. And then he assigned me some of the actors like Cuba Gooding Jr., who I had to take down to the Super Bowl in Phoenix. I made him pretend for a whole week he was a wide receiver client of mine to put him in role, and did similar things with Regina King and some different people. I actually had to show the quarterback in the film, who's played by Jerry O'Connell, how to throw a spiral, because he had gone to NYU and they didn't have a football program. So it's been like 27 years now, and I rarely can walk through an airport or go out to dinner without someone running up to the table and either asking me to say or saying those 4 words that start with "Show me the
money."
Right.
When the movie came out and you watched it, you probably saw it before it actually came out in theaters. Because I've had a number of other people I've known that have been involved similar like you. Were you pleased with it? Did you like it? Like, okay,
I was. I thought
hey, this is good.
Well, first of all, Cameron Crowe is a brilliant writer and very funny. And second of all, I think it humanized sports agents and showed the real caring. In other words, Cameron saw me and Warren Moon. He saw me and the players, and he saw there was hugging and real intimacy that went on, and a real caring outside the economics.
You know, Leigh, I want to say this in the right way, because when I look at you and your story, and I don't know you that well, I had lunch with you a couple years back, but you, to me, I think all of us, like, you know, I've been fired as a coach, and you know, when you're fired, it hurts. It hurts bad. You know, you know, I told people you take a couple days and you kind of lay in bed, and then you got to get yourself back up and you got to get going again. And then, which I did, and I was able to, you know, you're always kind of doing that through life. You know, it's hard, and you've had great highs, and then you've had some, you know, some lows, but you're like an amazing example of that resilient, keep swinging, keep coming, keep fighting, you know, dust yourself off. Let's go. And I think that's been I think it's a great lesson for a lot of people, even for all of us that have stubbed our toe and we've done some things and been fired. So it's just a great characteristic that you have.
Well, I think part of it's proportionality, understanding how good we actually have it. So when I was sitting struggling with alcohol, and my only thought was where I could find more vodka, eventually I had an epiphany and said, I'm not a starving peasant in Darfur. I don't live under the bombing pattern in the Ukraine. I don't have the last name Steinberg in Nazi Germany in the 30s. I don't have cancer. I'm not sick. What excuse do I have to wallow in alcohol? And the quality, my next book, which will be out sometime in the fall, is called The Comeback: Resilience, Empathy, and What Matters. And it's all stories of resilience. Life will knock you back. And it happens to all of us. So the question is not whether that'll happen, it's inevitable. How do you respond when you're in that circumstance? Can you do the work to get yourself back? Can you see the light at the end of the tunnel? can you understand that the very fact I was born in the United States, a free democracy with a high standard of living, I didn't fight in a war to protect that, but I've got all the blessings, and it's a matter of proportionality and then taking action, because at a certain point, no one wants to hear that you're done drinking. They just want to see what you do. And next month, if everything goes well, I'll be 15 years continuously sober.
Great for you, Leigh. Was there like for me, and I've had great highs, and I've had these amazing moments, part of a national championship, of conference championships. I took a team to the Elite Eight in the tournament, and on and on and on. But then I've had these other periods, and sometimes for me, I've always kind of been able to find somebody. Like for me, it's been my father. He's mid-80s right now, and I could call him on the phone, and so sometimes when you're in those periods, like, did you find there were people that you had in your life, and you don't need to mention them, but for me, there were people that I'm thankful that I had, because they helped me kind of get back up and, okay, let's go, Mark. It's okay. It's not the end of the world. So sometimes you think it is, in that moment, it's like, the sun's not going to come up tomorrow. Well, it is. And sometimes there were people that helped me. Were there people like that for you that you had in your world that you could say, hey, and just sometimes you just want to talk to somebody too.
Absolutely. And whatever success I've had in life has been a team success with a whole lot of people helping. And when I was at my darkest hour, there were people there for me. And I think when you think about friendship, it's easy to be someone's friend day to day. It's easy when everything's going well. But where are you when a friend's in a time of crisis? Where are you when it costs you something to stand up, for a friend? And we gave an award to Brett Favre at our Super Bowl party last week. And he ran into some problems, but we all do. And the point is, where are you at that moment? And if you're there and you show up, you're bonded forever. And so I try to, my job when it was after a football game was not to go to the winning locker room. It was to go to the losing locker room, because that person just needed me more. That's right. And I didn't need to be part of the celebration. Ultimately, I could get to that, but I needed to be there for the player that was in crisis.
Were there, how about for you, Leigh? Because for me at times when I was younger, public criticism hurt me really bad. It still does a little bit, but when I was younger, it really hurt. I'm trying my best. I'm the coach at Alabama, and I was there 11 years as the head coach. And, I got fired, and then people are taking some shots at you, and it just like hurts. And then I guess as you get older, you kind of, or at least I was able, still hurts, but you kind of begin to just, the critics they're just not going to bother me as much. People might say something about me, or, I'm sure in your life, there are people that love to take a shot, and say, hey, Leigh, but for you, just kind of tuning out the critics and saying, I'm just going to do what I do. I'm doing it the best I can. And, for you, talk about that a little bit, because I'm sure you faced it just like the athletes have. They have too.
There are always going to be people in the world who are not happy with their own existence. And the way they deal with that is by trying to tear down or criticize other people. And it's just inevitable. I chose a semi-public profession, in other words, and part of it is people are going to have strong opinions. And they're entitled to.
Yeah.
But we have a mission to help people and make it a nicer world, and you can't let the fact that there'll be people who are critics. I mean, your worst enemy back when you were doing that would be another assistant basketball coach or a head basketball coach, for which your success rubs it in their face. And you didn't do anything to create wasn't like you actually did something to that person, but the very fact you exist and you're at UCLA and you're winning everything, it just someone will resent that.
It's interesting because I've had a bunch of them and critics, but you just kind of you kind of get to ignore them after a while. But my 7 years, I was an assistant at UCLA, and we talked for a second before we went on. And your household growing up, back in that era, John Wooden at UCLA,
Was
the
the
coach,
Pope.
was
John
was everything.
Wooden and his triangle pyramid of success was up on a big wall, and along with the autographed John Wooden thing. Back in the 1950s, my dad's taken me to basketball games, and they were playing at Venice High Gym, and they were playing at the downtown at the and they were playing at Santa Monica College, right. And I was raised a Bruin baby. When I went to Cal, they characterized that in my family as running away from home.
I learned, excuse me, Leigh, so many lessons, from John Wooden. And, he was so generous. Like I could go out to his house, and he lived there in Tarzana, there in Encino, off of White Oak, off the 101, and we'd sit and talk. And there was always these amazing lessons. You'd sit there, and a lot of times we didn't really, he might every now and then pull out a piece of paper, and we're talking about the 221 press, but really that was about 10% of the time. The majority of the time is when I would sit with him and ask him questions about leadership or integrity or, and usually when I asked him a question, he had these amazing answers. They're almost like parables. He would tell you a story about one of the players, and within the story, there was the lesson. There was a lesson in there. But for you, like, just kind of growing up with, your family and the way and John Wooden at that time there was nobody. Well, there still really isn't anybody to me like John Wooden. I mean, he was in a class all by himself, but lessons learned a little bit from him, maybe even growing up, or things he said, or just the way he did things like that. Because for me, he was the best ever.
Well, it started with how he would have the players put their socks on, and there was a proper way. So it wasn't about the socks. It was about attention to detail, right. And it was paying attention. But he was so much a part of my youth, and going to UCLA basketball was so much a part of my youth that when I got to UCLA, I had a class with Lucius Allen and Mike Warren. Another time, I was in anthropology, all right? You had to run for classes at UCLA. You had to actually physically go sign up. So the first day I'm in anthropology, I'm late, and there's only one seat left. It's right in the middle. And I look up, and I can't see the professor. All that's in front of me is darkness. And at the end of the class, then Lou Alcindor turns around and says, "Oh, I'm sorry if I was blocking you." And but that is part of our culture was UCLA sports.
And back in that era too, and I got to know Bill Walton really well throughout the years, and he sat on the street at Wilshire and Westwood, Indian style, and protested the war. It was a different era.
He picked up one of those parking ticket little cars they have and stuck it in the front of Murphy Hall. But here's where we were back then. My freshman year, UCLA had the best team in football, and this was 1966, and they voted for SC to go to the Rose Bowl. So we were so angry because it was most representative team. We were so angry, we walked up Gailey, made a right on Wilshire, and walked up on the freeway. So my first protest was protesting UCLA being discriminated against because they didn't get to go to the Rose Bowl.
That's amazing. The ability to have an entire kind of life, and I've been fortunate too in sports, because sports teaches you so much about life. I tell people that all the time, and I played and I coached and all that, but just the lessons we all learn from sports. And you've been your whole life basically involved with sports.
So that's the thing. When I fight this fight on concussion, trying to get more safety in the sport, it's not to destroy football. Football and every sport teaches life lessons. It's self-discipline. It's postponing current gratification for future success. It's teamwork. It's taking a complex body of information and employing it in real time. It's courage under pressure. It's performance under pressure. All of those are essential skills that can lead someone to be successful in family and business and everything else. So I think it teaches great life skills. Unfortunately, along comes NIL, and all it's about is money.
Yeah. I'm happy for the players. They can get some money off of name, image, and likeness, but I don't like kind of the whole, we got to figure out how to do it. And I tell people all the time, I coached Ed O'Bannon for 5 years. I was with Ed for 5 of my 7 years at UCLA, and I tell people, every player in America, college athlete, they ought to give a percentage to Ed O'Bannon because he got the ball rolling on that whole thing.
The players that were from underprivileged families just wanted a little more money.
Yeah.
If it had been $3,000 or $5,000 to help them get another car or live in a nicer place, they would have been delighted. And now you have a player go to LSU and commit at quarterback, and along comes a Michigan alum and offers him $14 million, and he decommits and goes to there. So this is all free agency for high school players. It's going to evolve into 4 conferences being in football and basketball, the only conferences. Right. They will elevate. They'll eliminate the NCAA. They'll do their own rules and negotiations, and it'll have a destructive effect on every non-revenue sport and women's sports. And the combination of NIL, the introduction of gambling association, and conference realignment has totally changed the tableau of sports the way we grew up with it and know it.
Yeah. Do you think, would you agree, Leigh, like when I tell people, and I coach for years and years and years, and with the NIL and the portal and kids changing schools every year too and all that, like I'm happy that players can receive compensation. I like that. I mean, I think there's a time when, I was coaching at NC State, and I've got the ACC Player of the Year, and in every bookstore and every mall, they're selling his jersey with his name and number. So I understand that. Like, he should receive, some of that. I get all that. But when I look at it, and I look at the way they're doing it right now, as far as just, throwing money, like you mentioned, the Barstool Sports, so we're just going to pay a guy $14 million. And then the portal. College athletics, to me, is still that transition from, high school to being an adult and pro. And I'm glad they can make money, but I'm afraid we're going to lose a little bit of kind of that teaching people how to fight through tough situations. I can just go to another team next year. As soon as I don't get to play on this team, I go to that team. And then if it doesn't work out there, I just go to the next team. I just keep moving around. And some of the great successful athletes, they've had to go through those hard, trying times where they had to get better, and they stuck with it. And, sometimes the answer is not to go find another school. It's just to get better. Do you feel like we'll lose a little bit of that, or we are?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
First of all, 15-year-olds quarterbacks now want to have name, image, likeness. I mean, my approach to players requires a pretty sophisticated player and mature player. That's not there. But I'll give you another example because of your UCLA background. I went to Hamilton High in West LA, and one of the players was Sidney Wicks. So Sidney Wicks is vastly talented. He gets to UCLA, and he won't follow all of Coach Wooden's admonitions. So he sits him, and John Vallely plays in front of him, who had a great shot from the side, but Sidney's infinitely more gifted. Sidney stayed at UCLA. There was nowhere to go, and eventually learned the lessons, and that discipline helped him be a first-round draft pick and a great NBA player. That's not happening anymore. In other words, the whole concept of patience, waiting your turn, not there. It's all immediacy. So I was all for players getting stipends and compensation, but they'd have been happy with $5,000. They didn't need $15 million.
You know, Leigh, I was for years in basketball, the National Association of Basketball Coaches, on our board of directors, and so we would meet at the NCAA, like with Mark Emmert, who was the previous president, and we would say to him a lot, like, "This is coming, Mark. It's coming. Like, it's coming," and it was almost like they really didn't believe that it was going to happen.
So when
it happened, it just it was like, guys, this is happening. It's coming.
Unintended consequences. Right. In other words, they just didn't think it out. They didn't think out gambling when a player who's in financial trouble might shave performance or give information to a bookie. They didn't think through conference realignment, where I used to walk across the campus at Berkeley and look at the Pacific Ocean and the Golden Gate Bridge. And now Cal's in a conference that's located in North Carolina and looks at the Atlantic Ocean. Well, that makes a lot of sense for trips. So, we don't want to sound like two old disgruntled veterans talking about the good old days, but some of these new developments are not positive.
I agree. So, Leigh, let me ask you this, as you've had this amazing career. Hopefully you got another 20 years of representing great players like you're currently doing. But, as we all get older, and I've gotten older, and I look back, like for you, what would you love for your clients and all the guys and gals you've had and represented and you've been around, like for you, like the lasting impression, like, man, I want to be thought of as this, one day, because it'll end for all of us. Hopefully, again, for you, you got a long time ahead of you, but you've had this amazing run for so many years. What is it that you would love for people to remember Leigh Steinberg by?
Just the quality of caring, that you can make a difference in the world in a positive way. The concept of responsibility, that we're all responsible for enhancing the quality of life of our families and then the larger society.
Well said. Well, thank you, Leigh, so much. And like I've said at the start, I've had some wonderful guests, amazing guests in all walks of life, but I was looking forward to this one, to spend time with you and just the wealth of experience that you've had. So thank you so much for coming on.
You're welcome, sir.
Thank you.